While Washington freezes cartel assets in Mazatlan, their very owners walk through U.S. customs with stamped visas. Welcome to America's narco diplomacy. I'm Katarina Schultz, and this is Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original. Today, we're going to be going through how so many cartels and their members are being sanctioned in public, yet protected in private. I have so many examples of this happening recently. We're going to get through all of them because these are two juxtaposing realities. I mean, on one side, the US government is saying they want to crack down on cartels and they're taking these very public, dramatic actions to do so. While at the same time, there's this covert reality going on where background deals, plea deals, and agreements are being made that protect the very people in charge of some of the largest and most powerful cartels operating in Mexico, the US, Canada, and everywhere in every country that you could possibly imagine. So, first of all, let's get into the Office of Foreign Assets Control because I have them bookmarked because they are constantly making these counter narcotics and counterterrorism designations and designation updates. So, this specially designated nationals list grows basically daily, particularly when it comes to the people that are designated as terrorists or narcos. Now, over the past couple of months, I'd say since the beginning of Trump's term in January, I'm going to refer to this office as OFAC, just, you know, for clarity. So OFAC has sanctioned dozens of high-level CJNG and Chapitos members. They've also blacklisted a lot of their and seized control of their companies, whether that's like spas, shell companies. That goes for in Mexico and in the US or any of these Mexican companies that are profiting off of Americans. At the same time, at least 17 members of El Chapo's family crossed right into the US through the infamous Sanicedro border crossing between Tijuana and San Diego and were allowed to come in to stay in the US on American-issued visas. Everything has been very legit, and yet their family members are on OFAC's list. Let's go through some of this list because it's growing, and literally just this week, it grew. Some designations were amended in a way. First of all, we have really high-profile CJNG figures. I'll go through some names here. We have Ricardo Ruiz Velasco, who's el doble R, Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitán, el Sapo, Audias Flores Silva, el Jardinero, who I spoke about in a previous episode because he's now he's always had this major role with CJNG, and now he's taking on this major role with Los Chapitos since El Perris was captured and killed. And then the designation for El Mencho, Nemesio Ceguera Cervantes, was amended. There's also a few explicitly named Chapitos owned businesses that have been sanctioned. That includes Carpe Diem Spa and Siwa Beach Club, both operating in Mazatlan. Again, this is another thing that I've spoken about a lot, is how tourist hubs, resort towns are key regions for cartel money. It's incredibly lucrative. I mean, whether it's a spa, a smoke shop, the very resort that many of you guys, the viewers, probably stay at, these are places where the cartels are using to launder money and to make money, whether that be through illicit means or political loopholes. Now, obviously, the objective of these designations is to cripple the financial operations because that's a major part of dismantling cartels and cracking down on them. So the way they do this, it's via like a certain designation, and it's through the anti-terrorism and narcotics trafficking authorities. Because this is also something a little bit new since cartels have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations. They're not just hit with that RICO or the Narco designation. They're now hit with the same designation that ISIS or Al Qaeda would be facing. And the result of this is truly this symbolic visibility. So the public is being fed one notion that our administration is cracking down. The government is sanctioning and freezing the assets of these cartels and the members. But at the same time, there's very limited operational damage if you're allowing the very people who are associates with the people you're attacking to freely come into the United States and basically live their lives as normal. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what really happened with El Chapo's family coming into the US. And I have some notes here because it was a little weird on both ends. Um, First of all, 17 relatives of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman entered the US early this year under legal visas. Okay, they literally walked across. There's images of them with their luggage coming in. 17 members. Like, that's not just your immediate family, right? And so apparently this deal sort of dates back a few years. I'm unsure about that. I had tried to get some people to confirm it, but it seems like we're kind of in the middle with this. Um, However, it's certainly a possibility because Chapo has been in US custody for years at this point. And now that Mayo is in custody and Chapo's sons are in custody, the US essentially, and in American custody, the US essentially has this upper hand in terms of negotiating with the leaders, head honchos of the Sinaloa cartel, or what was once the Sinaloa cartel. And I'm a big proponent for not negotiating with terrorists. And this is exactly what's going on. I mean, blatantly, because they've been designated as terrorists. So I guess the possible rationale here, this is certainly their rationale, is that this is for intelligence cooperation. You guys are definitely going to hit me with those. It's CIA, right? Um, Asset recovery and legal insulation for plea deals, which we are literally watching happen in real time with the ongoing narco cases. But I have two major questions here, okay? Why grant visas to relatives tied to a sanctioned transnational criminal organization? Who does that benefit? If we look at the human approach to this, the people on the ground who are the very people affected by these criminal organizations, it's an absolute slap in the face. I talked about this on the Q&A episode with Vince on Borderland. And, Vince said that certainly this is a way to get that plea deal, to get more information from the very people who were doing the dealings in this organization. But my point of view is, you say you want to tackle these organizations, and then you go ahead and give them this blatant, very public immunity when so many thousands of people were harmed at the hand of these people's family members. I mean, I know, and you guys say it to me all the time, Mexico isn't the responsibility of the United States. But once the United States starts playing a major role in the way these organizations are operating and the legal consequences and justice that they're bound to face, I would say that the victims of these people deserve to have their voices heard. And very much they're allowed to be angry. I would certainly be pissed. So I find that these sanctions sort of lose legitimacy when the families targeted publicly are protected privately. I mean, You make El Chapo public enemy number one. You do the same for Mayo, you do the same for Mencho, whatever. And then you go ahead and give public enemy immunity for his family. Protect them. Allowed to blase walk into the land of the free and the home of the brave. And then what? Now, this also allows for criminals to adapt because it basically allows for the owners of front companies to rotate. So let's say, hypothetically, a member of these 17 people from El Chapo's family that are now in the United States can no longer be, hypothetically, conducting business for the cartel. That responsibility shifts to someone else, further allowing these companies and these illegal activities to continue to go on completely under the radar because focus has shifted. Then you have the use of non-sanctioned clean relatives to bypass restrictions. So if somebody close to you is on the list, whether you're involved in these illegal activities or not, doesn't really matter because these sanctions go to show that even if you are, the nephew of El Mencho, but there's no way to prove or perhaps there's no ties to show that you are part of these illicit dealings with this individual, you're scot-free. You could even literally get some sort of refuge in the United States. And I think it completely undermines the entire purpose of these sanctions and of this OFAC list. Truly, the public message is that we're tough on crime. These sanctions are meant to crack down on these people, to instigate some sort of fear or, show who has the power. But in reality, the private message is showing that there are strategic exceptions. We're willing to make a deal with you, give you safety, if that means in some way we can gain something and get some more information. Now, at the end of the day, what kind of information are they looking for that warrants allowing this type of, it's not a loophole, but what warrants this type of action to allow these family members into the United States when they're part of one of the largest crime families in organized crime history? Perhaps it's some sort of information that in the long run keeps a lot of people safe, has some sort of greater meaning. That sounds very CIA, as I'm sure a lot of you will point out. I don't agree with it. And truth be told, like I said, I think the human toll historically and present day trumps any sort of deal that's being made. And these deals, like I said, undermine the entire justice system. The US really isn't dismantling cartel infrastructure. What they're doing is they're regulating it from within and basically managing which players are acceptable and which are not. It doesn't matter who you're related to, what you may have done, or even what you may know.
Do you remember the great ammo shortage of 2020? Shelves were bare, and even online options were wiped out or incredibly overpriced. Well, there's a company that is making sure that that never happens again. It's called Ammo Squared, and they've been helping over 100,000 members stockpile ammo automatically since 2015. Here's how it works. You sign up. You pick your ammo from over 70 different calibers, you set an auto-buy budget, and choose a shipping frequency, or you just let it grow. Over time, your ammo accumulates and it is stored for free in Ammo Squared's climate-controlled facilities in Texas and Idaho until you're ready to ship. There are no minimums, and there are no extra fees. It is perfect for small budgets or anyone who wants to build up stockpile without spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars up front. It is the easiest way to stay prepared without the hassle. Head to ammosquared.com and take the work out of buying your ammunition. 100,000 members and thousands of 5-star reviews cannot be wrong. That is ammosquared.com. Check them out today for a very special offer.
So let's get into this sort of bigger picture. And this ties into that CJNG Chapitos alliance because I found what to be the most shocking is that when these sanctions were made against all these big dogs, but these 17 family members were let in, it wasn't just something that happened out of nowhere and perhaps there was some sort of way to explain it. Rather, it happened right at the same time that CG&G made an alliance with Chapitos, meaning, okay, we saw that the Chapitos were really struggling in this war, and now they have the largest group backing them up. And you're going to tell me that these people who are being let in are completely innocent and it's safe to allow them freely to move on American soil? So here's some recent developments, right? There are plenty of videos of joint patrols in El Rosario in Sinaloa of CJNG members backing up the Chapitos conducting, wait, I guess you would call operations on behalf of this Chapitos CJNG alliance. Now, I kind of mentioned this before, but to me, this alliance isn't, hey, we're backing up the Chapitos because we think that they deserve this support and we're going to help them out. It's really a way for CJ&G to gain overall control. You know, they're seeing this, their biggest rival die in real time. What's the best they could do is, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's exactly what they're doing. They're keeping the Chapitos as close as possible, which brings them closer to Mayo's faction of the cartel, allows them to monitor every aspect of what's going on in this infighting, and furthermore, take control of whatever is left of this fragmented cartel. And we've seen CG&G do this over and over again, where as soon as they see some sort of infighting or a fragment, rip off into its own sector, they go all in, they attack, and that becomes theirs. That further allows them to become this expansionist cartel. Now, CJ&G is controlling the precursors and the production hubs, allegedly, for the Chapitos. Meanwhile, the Chapitos continue to control trafficking routes and shell networks. But let's also talk about how this is kind of becoming this evolving collaboration rather than competition, because the Gulf cartel is also involved, and they're not a rival. They're acting as like a regional facilitator. They have the location, they have their own sort of powerhouse, and now everyone's working together while the United States is trying to tell us that they're sanctioning these guys in order to dismantle them. Oh my God. United together we stand. I mean, you'd have to have half a brain to look at this and not realize what's going on. But then we see these headlines pop out and these press releases from these federal agencies that are telling us and showing us that they're cracking down on these big bad guys. And they're the ones, with the power. And then you really dive deep into it and you see that that's just allowing them to band together and find loopholes to ensure that they can not only maintain the stronghold that they have, but push it to the next level. Okay, so let's talk about Mexico's reaction, because really, like, this is the ground in which this is taking place, and yet the Mexican president and Mexican federal authorities claim to be completely out of the loop with this. And here's the thing. I can sort of like understand why that would be the case, just because there's so much deep-rooted corruption in Mexican politics and Mexican politicians and government bodies, that in order for an operation to tackle organized crime in a country where this impunity and corruption exists, you kind of have to leave them in the dark to a certain extent, just so that certain ears aren't tipped off, right? But at the same time, like, politically, this really goes against like diplomacy, democracy, sovereignty, all the E words, really.
From day one, Change Agents has been about one thing: telling the stories of people who risk everything to make a difference.
I was trying to get him to confess to murdering those veterans at the VA hospital.
I guess you got to go all the way up the food chain.
This season, we're raising the stakes. We're going to sit down with men and women who aren't just helping communities, they're stepping into the most dangerous hidden corners of the world. These are the voices most people never hear, operating behind the headline, under fire, and in the dark. I'm Andy Stumpf, and this is Change Agents, an Ironclad original. New episodes are going to drop every Wednesday. You can watch and listen on YouTube at This Is Ironclad and everywhere else that you get your podcasts.
Mexican intelligence officials openly expressed outrage about this deal, kind of calling it like a coordinated betrayal of the joint security framework. Fair enough. I mean, when Trump when he came into office in January and really was like, we're cracking down on these guys, Mexico, what are you going to do about it? And show us. Mexico upped their operations in terms of getting the bad guys and also securing the border, deploying additional thousands of troops. Mexican special operators were in charge of the capture and kill of El Perris, major operator in Los Chapitos faction of the Sinaloa cartel. And this is just one of like many operations, because then a lot of plaza bosses were getting taken down, and you won't really hear that in American news just because it's not as significant as the names that we do know, the names that are on FBI's most wanted, for example. But in terms of dismantling this from at home, Mexico was doing this. I'm not entirely sure, and it's safe to say that they weren't doing it to the standards of the United States. But at the same time, look at what the United States is doing. Why is Chapito's family in the United States? Now, it kind of does undermine the faith in the binational counter-narcotics agreement, but we've also seen Mexico agree to kind of bypass this, especially when the 29 top capos, including Caro Quintero, were sent to the U.S. to face American justice system just a few months ago. That wasn't done. The legal framework of that didn't align or follow with the normal extradition procedure that most of these major narcos face when they're getting sent to the US. And so, in a way, by Mexico already doing something like that, truly, it sort of already undermines the way they're willing to handle these binational counter-narcotic agreements anyways. And so at that point, when something like that is done, it's not surprising to me for the US to say, well, they're doing their part and they don't really seem to care whether we follow agreements or not. So full send. Let's let's sanction some people, let others in, and we don't have to tell the Mexican government anything about it. Doesn't mean the Mexican government is not going to be pissed. Essentially, while Mexico is burning these safe houses, planning these targeted long operations to capture and even kill major heads of various cartels throughout Mexico, the US is letting their family members into the country, allowing them a safe haven. And so this is what I also find interesting, is there is supposed to be, especially due to the US's concerns with the cartels, there is supposed to be this bilateral effort. That's really, honestly, the only way to tackle something so large like the cartel problem. Once either government oversteps that, it completely shatters the foundation of what these efforts are built on. And so the United States is doing these backdoor deals. The Mexican government doesn't know. Do you really think the Mexican government will continue to give in to what the U.S. is asking of them in order to do their part, or what the U.S. perceives as Mexico's part, in tackling the cartels when they receive nothing in return? And actually, they're kind of losing out because they're being kept in the dark. Now, personally, I wouldn't say they're getting nothing in return, simply due to the fact that I think dismantling the cartels, of course, is a huge service to Mexico, because for the majority of people living in Mexico, the cartels are wreaking havoc on their daily lives, and omitting that major burden would be great for Mexican society. So in like a holistic approach, they are getting something in return. But something in this very instant where, hey, the US government wants to make a plea deal with Los Chapitos and El Chapo, so we're going to have to allow their family members into our country, but we're not going to tell the Mexican government about it. Yeah, the optics of that just simply aren't great, despite all of the other factors that go into it, like I mentioned, the impunity and the corruption. Now, truth be told, the real war here isn't against drugs. I fully believe it's a war against or for controlling the narrative. And we're seeing this happen right now. Every day that this list grows of individuals that are sanctioned, of companies that have their assets frozen or they're sanctioned as well. And the more the Mexican president says that she is being told less and less, this is a narrative that's being pushed. And unfortunately, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are caught in the middle and actually literally losing their lives over this. It's very upsetting to me, and I think that sanctions and visas are two sides of the same coin, okay? One keeps up the appearance of pressure, while the other is preserving useful relationships. This is such a complex issue, and it's not the first time we're seeing it, certainly. But I would say it's probably one of the first times we're seeing it happen in real time and so blatantly. It's happening right in front of our faces. But the key here is to be aware of it. Because if I didn't dive into this and really, give the breakdown, how would we know? I'm not trying to pump my tires, but at the same time, yeah. I think it's really important to sit back and dive into this and stay critical as a viewer, whether you are or are not impacted by what's going on. Organized crime and tackling it affects all of us, which is why I will always continue to cover the cartels and continue to cover transnational crime. And for as long as the United States continues to sanction who they want, accept also who they want, and keep Mexico in the dark, it's really hard for me to see an end to any of what's going on. Thank you so much for tuning in to this really complicated episode. I'm Katarina Schultz, and this was your episode of Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original. Please be sure to share, like, and subscribe. And as always, see you next time.